Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. Hey Keith.
How's it going, Bill? Life still warm down there in Arizona?
Yeah, we pulled out of a major cold spell here. I think we had a high couple 3 days ago of like 57, Keith. I kid you not. It was beyond sweater weather here. Fireplaces were like kicked up and blankets were, heated blankets. Yeah. Socks in bed underneath,
it snowed here
covers
on Thursday.
Yeah.
We had snow. So
today is actually it's beautiful. I mean, there's not a cloud in the sky. It's 70, it'll be 70 degrees today.
Nice.
The Foo Fighters are playing down at the Innings Festival, an outdoor festival here in Tempe. Today headlining, and
you gotta go check that out. Foo Fighters.
I know. I've seen the Foo Fighters a couple times, and I'm just like, I don't know, because I don't like people. So what do you what do you do? What do you do with that? Like, you really want to see somebody, but then you got to stand amongst a throng of human beings to do it. Maybe. Logan, so tomorrow's headliner is like Tame Impala, and I'm not familiar, but apparently this band is like the thing, and he's more interested in seeing that because he's going to see the Foo Fighters in June. So
okay,
so yeah. So today we are talking about the NFL Combine. It's NFL Combine week, Keith. It's like, I'm so excited to see players kind of go through the motions, go through the drills. Teams have a chance to sit down with up to 30 players and interview those players. So it's a real busy week for all the teams in the NFL and all the players. It's an exciting time.
Team doctors get a chance to poke and prod almost everyone. That's part of the reason.
And that's part of the information we never get to.
Exactly. We're never privy to anything that goes on in the interviews, any of the medical information. All we see is the coach and GM press conferences, which are full of nothing because they don't want to give away anything. And we get to see the tests, which are cool and fun, and they do matter, but they don't matter nearly as much as we sometimes want them to.
Yeah, it is interesting because we always go through this process. We have a great time. I think we do a really good job at it. This will be our 6th year of doing it, which is amazing. By the way, this is episode number 300. Congratulations. Wow. I know. But we always miss those pieces, and so we go through this process. So does everyone else. Everyone else is kind of in the same boat, even Adam Schefter. I mean, they get some inside information, but basically they fly through the dark just like everybody else on most of these intangibles. And we're talking about the interviews and backgrounds and team fits and psychological profiles, all that kind of stuff that teams do. We just don't know about. So when we do our mock drafts and we kind of predict the draft and all that stuff, it really is flying in the dark when it comes to about 35 or 40% of what teams consider really, really important for all these prospects. So, but we do the best we can.
Well, I think back to Bruce Irvin when he came out in 2012. There were all these question marks around him and legal trouble, and you could see the physical gifts. And the Seahawks ended up taking him in the first round. And I think right before the draft, I mocked him to Seattle in round 3, and it was because all of that legal stuff was there, and it was like this big black cloud. And so everyone was like, nah, he's not going to be a first or second round pick because no one's going to risk that on him. And it turned out that all of that stuff was nothing. It was just absolutely nothing. But we didn't ever get that information. All we had was the reports from early on when like, oh, he was arrested for this. And then there was, this other stuff. And it turned out to be an absolutely nothing. And he was a first round pick. And there are lots of teams that were looking at him as a first round pick. So it is just kind of an interesting thing with that. You got guys that, we are like, wow, this guy's going to go early. You look at his tape, it's like great. And then you see them drop into like the 5th round and you're like, what? And you find out after the fact that, there's a bunch of legal problems that we don't even know about. And so it is that's part where this kind of stuff, the teams address a lot of that right now in the combine within those.
And they had access to some of these guys at the Senior Bowl as well. And so they just kind of compiled that together, and it's really pretty cool. The other thing on the other side of that is we always find out that we thought at the draft that the Seahawks overdrafted or went up and got somebody too high or whatever. He could have been available at the next pick. And then we come to find out that there were 2 or 3 other teams that were, seriously looking at that player right after the Seahawks, and they kind of made the jump.
People were upset about Jordan Brooks when he went, and then we find out, that there were teams like literally the next pick. He would have gone to the next pick if Seattle didn't take him.
And as it turns out, great player. I mean, you can debate whether you spend a first round pick on an outside line off the ball linebacker in the NFL. Sure, let's have that debate. But then let's go look at the impact he has long term on the team. If you were to go back and say to that person that's debating you, if I could guarantee you that this player was going to be on the team for 8 years, make the Pro Bowl like 4 times, and just be a perennial guy, basically injury free, would you make that pick? And I'd say absolutely. All right. So what else is going on? I think Pete and John, you mentioned Wednesday, or not Wednesday, but you mentioned interviews of all the coaches and GMs this week. Seahawks are up on the clock on Wednesday to do that. In years past, those are interesting because we just don't get a chance to have those guys in front of us all the time and talk to us about the team, about the players, what they're thinking, how they evaluate the process, all that kind of stuff, without getting into any specifics. So it's nice to have that, but nonetheless, do you expect anything this year as far as any tidbits, any clues at all that you might see?
No, I expect a lot of the questions to be around Russell Wilson and all of that. And they're going to do their best to put all of that to bed and just be like, okay, everyone can stop, talking about it because it's not going to happen. And it won't stop anyone from talking about it. But I thought they'll try.
They might talk about the defense.
True, but I'm just saying, like, there's going to be those questions, and then there are going to be questions for Pete, not necessarily for John, but for Pete about, okay, what's the scheme going to be? How different is it going to be? How much turnover of personnel is going to happen?
Yeah, see, now that's where I'm looking.
A new speed.
That's where I'll be looking for clues.
Yeah, me too, and I hope they'll give us something. But it's there's nothing to be gained for these teams to be overly forthcoming, and to the point where some of the football writers refer to this time period as lying season, because teams will actually come out and say things that are exact opposite of what they believe, because they don't want to tip their hand before the draft or before free agency or in negotiations with a player and all of that. So
that's why looking at the transcript is okay, and it's fun to read. But the facial expressions, especially from like a guy like John Schneider, who just kind of has this little smirk once in a while when he knows he wants to say something, but he's not going to say it. That alone is worth the price of gold for me. All right. So what else was going on? Oh, social media. You wanted to talk about something funny.
So earlier this week, Russell Wilson changed his profile pic on Twitter to one of him and his dad. Back in, when, because they're from Virginia, and the football world, especially like the national writers and ESPN, just melted down over it. Oh my God, is he saying that he wants to be traded to, the Washington Commanders, or is this his signal that he wants out of Seattle, and it was just like this instant drama, like just dripping with stupidity. And guess what? The Seahawks are back as his profile pick again. Yes. Russell Wilson's a really smart guy. He knows that these things are going to be talked about. He and his wife also just published a children's book. And so
they're literally building a media empire. If there's one human being that's affiliated with the Seattle Seahawks organization, Russell Wilson knows how to do it better than anybody.
Mm-hmm. And so he's like, oh, how do we get everybody talking about Russell Wilson again without doing anything like crazy? Have him change his picture of his Twitter to a picture of him and his dad, his late father, we should say. And because, people are going to freak out about it. And the national people that don't know him they don't seem to realize that it's a big deal for him at this time of year for a reason. Like, just everyone needs to just stop. But at the same time, I think that it's what Wilson wanted. He wanted people talking about him. He wanted to be the name, not because he wants traded, but because he wants to, continue to build his brand and be that guy that everyone knows, even non-football fans. So there you go. Thank you for falling victim to his trap.
Yeah. And well, exactly, I think there is a lot of kind of that going around, not just with profile pictures, but the trade rumors and the nonstop. And quite frankly, it all comes from a place of passion. That's kind of where it comes from. It's not a bad place or a dark place or misplaced. It's other fan bases basically being in we have no quarterback hell for such a long time that they're so desperate to get something that's reasonably amazing in their franchise. And so everyone, I think, universally likes Russell Wilson. There's not a universal feeling about Aaron Rodgers, for example. But when you talk about Russell Wilson, you can literally go to our worst rival, San Francisco 49ers, and their fan base loves Russell Wilson. It hates Russell Wilson because they love him so much. He's such admired, a good quarterback, good person, but on the field, he's a clutch player. And so he's just one of those guys. I don't know what it is about Russell Wilson as far as the trade rumors, because if there's any quarterback I've ever seen, he's in every single trade rumor imaginable, which is amazing considering what comes out of his mouth, what comes out of the team. They've seemingly put this to bed, and yet it just continues on and on and on. It's fun to speculate, but man, is it tiresome. So I don't even really pay attention to it for the most part.
I pay attention to it simply for the entertainment factor. To see the Tennessee Titans were the name that came up this week for the first time that I thought they were like talking about trading Ryan Tannehill and 4 first-round picks to Seattle for Wilson in order to, pry him loose. He was like, you get Wilson and you're instantly the Super Bowl favorite, because that defense and that running game and those skill position players, and then you put in a real franchise quarterback instead of a game manager. And for them, they're just like, yeah, this is what we got to do. This will get us a title, especially after the Rams essentially bought a title this year, where they did that. They traded their entire future for 1 or 2 years of trying to compete right now, and it worked. It got them a title. So now everyone's like, hey, we can do that too. We can trade away everything for Russell Wilson, go get a title, and then who cares if we have to rebuild and we're bad for 10 years? We got a title. And so teams are looking at that. But go look at what Russell Wilson said at the Pro Bowl. He's not going anywhere, everybody. He's not. I get that.
And the team wouldn't move on without a legitimate replacement. Now, would they consider a Tannehill a legitimate replacement with 4 first-round draft picks? I mean, you can have a conversation about that. Obviously, that's a made-up thing by a fan base or whatever. I don't know if you wouldn't have a legitimate source, I think, behind that. But
no, it was someone at ESPN just speculating.
So we can all speculate. It's fun to speculate. Here's what I do believe. I do believe that speculation will turn into reality here in the next 3 or 4 weeks. I think the Rodgers piece will fall first. And once that falls, the dominoes will follow after, and Russell will be the next domino. And I believe that we will go through a process of 2 or 3 weeks where we will be hearing about compensation packages being offered to the Seattle Seahawks for Russell Wilson from legitimate sources. And
look what the Bears offered last year.
And it'll be I don't know if it'll be the Packers, but maybe it will if they lose Rodgers, who knows? And then it'll be the Broncos, it'll be Indianapolis, possibly it will be Tampa, it will be
Pittsburgh,
the Saints,
New Orleans,
Pittsburgh, it'll be the Washington Commanders. So so this could end up turning into a bidding war. Now, if you were in a position, if Seattle had maybe drafted a quarterback earlier and had developed one, they may be in a better position to kind of take advantage, given the idea that, the cap hit with Russell Wilson and he's getting into, his mid-30s. And so you kind of look at that. But then again, there's no reason to believe that he's slowing down as far as his skill set. Maybe, he's lost a step running, but that's about it. So it'll be interesting to see how large these packages go and if there's any teeth to them, because if you end up, the common perception for me is that there's 3 first-round draft picks on the table and a player or 2, and possibly throw in a second rounder or something into that equation. That seems to be the top level kind of bid. But what if this thing does get into 4 first-round draft picks? What if it does get into 4 first-round draft picks plus a young quarterback in return, or a starting corner, or whatever it might be? Those sorts of things are hard to ignore. That the 4 first-round draft pick compensation thing would be the largest compensation package in the history of the NFL, and it would be something that the team could legitimately rebuild an entire team around. And so you do have to pay attention to that, because you just don't know at that point. They may sit down with Russell, like he may get those offers, and Schneider maybe, sit down with Mark Rodgers and Russell Wilson and just say, listen, here's our package. Do you want to stay? Do you want to stay? If you do, I think we're going to extend you so that we can have some cap room, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to be our quarterback of the future, and we're going to handle this right now. Do you want to go? If you want to go, here's the team. Here's the deal. Here's your situation there. Blah, 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 blah. So that conversation could actually happen. I don't know. I'm not saying it will. I'm just saying if it gets down that road, it could get to that point.
I think that conversation will happen, but it won't happen with the idea of, we're going to present this to Russ and he's going to go. It's, hey, this is what we're being offered, and we're ready to turn this down because we want you here. We want you here, and we want to not go through this every year. So can we change your contract in a way that puts this to bed? You're here for the rest of your career, and we don't have to listen to this anymore.
Or here's your chance to leave before your contract runs out.
Yeah. And so are they going to get to that point? I kind of think they will, but it's not going to come from a place of Wilson leaving. It's kind of going to come from a place of, we are making this commitment to you, not just financially, but as the face of this franchise for the foreseeable future. And using that as a tool to just make sure that we don't go through this every year. That's kind of where we're at.
All right. Plenty of time to talk about that in the future. I think we probably will. Just speculating there. Yep. Let's get to the combine. So let's talk about the combine for a brief minute and talk about, in general, what we use the combine for and what we're looking for from some of these prospects, and specifically for the Seattle Seahawks.
Well, a lot of what we, when you go through and look at this, you're looking at tests for athleticism, like how do they rank among their peers and amongst players currently in the NFL in terms of speed, agility, explosiveness, power, strength, coordination, just all these different things. And it comes down to like, what are you looking for? What aren't you looking for? Every team's a little different, but you want guys with longer arms, and you want guys, that are faster and quicker and, more agile. But that it isn't the end all for evaluation. Like, you've seen guys that aren't the fastest, but it turn out to be, fantastic players. Like, Cooper Kupp comes to mind. And then you have guys that are just athletic freaks that never do anything in the NFL. But there is a correlation between athleticism and success, but there's those, that correlation isn't like a perfect correlation where it's like, oh, the more athletic, the better you are. But there is, some of that.
So when we take a look at quarterbacks this year, it's everyone is talking about this class being second tier all the way, and not really a top contender. Most of these guys in a good quarterback year, say last year, maybe wouldn't even been in the first round at all. So we've got Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Sam Howell, Desmond Ridder. Those are the top 5 guys. All 5 do have an opportunity based on their showing at the combine to move up in the draft. I don't think Seattle's going to be in this market unless something happens. They will be paying attention to these players because you just never know. But what do you expect from this group? And is there anybody at all that could help themselves?
I'm I'm not expecting a lot from this group, mainly because what you're going to see is a guy like Malik Willis just run out of the building and get everyone super excited because of his speed and athleticism. He's not quite Lamar Jackson, but people are going to think of him a little bit in that mold because of his ability to run. But he's going to be fun. But does what he does in this combine matter that much? Not really, unless he goes out and just everyone's like, whoa, he's a lot slower than we thought he was based on tape and whatnot. It's not going to affect him.
Here's where I think he can help himself. He does all of that. So he runs well, he tests well, he also throws well. That's really important in this, is people are going to want to see him up close. Nobody really kind of went to Liberty games, a lot of scouts and so forth. I mean, they did, but they get him now in this building. They're going to be able to see him sling it right up close and personal. The other thing that will help him possibly is that interview process that we talked about. I don't think he's going to have any problem with the medical. It's going to be the leadership ability. Everyone's going to find out what kind of a person he is and so forth. Matt Corral could help himself, I think, a little bit. Another guy that I think that really could kind of move up that nobody's really talking about anymore is Sam Howell. Sam Howell last year had a great year, a great season. They had a good roster offensively at North Carolina. Then everyone kind of moved on and he was left without any talent around him. Came back and had an okay statistical year. Didn't drop off percentages wise, just attempts and completions and all that kind of stuff were down, but he's still that same guy. He is a guy that I think currently, hovering right in between round 1 and round 2 could solidify his position up, in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, when they do throw, they're going to be throwing against no defense. But there's the guys that are viewed as maybe a little dink and dunkish, guys like Carson Strong and Matt Corral. If they, throw some dimes down the field to some of these fast receivers, I think there's going to be some GMs that take notice. I'm like, okay, well, maybe they threw a lot of short stuff because that was the offense they ran, but that doesn't mean they don't have the ability to throw it deep. They just were never asked to. But even then, it's going to be like, okay, so we saw it a little bit, but there's no defense, there's no pressure, there's no cornerback to throw it over. You're just, hitting a guy who's running. So But there might be a little bit of that. Some of those guys that aren't viewed as big-armed quarterbacks getting an opportunity to, show off some of that are a deep accuracy.
So let's talk about some position groups where the Seahawks might have some skin in the game. Let's talk about running back. Everyone knows Seattle needs a running back.
Absolutely.
Penny's, a free agent. We just don't know if he'll accept a 1-year deal to come back, or if the Seahawks are thinking maybe extending him for a little longer than that. That's possible. Chris Carson's got the neck thing. He's available and under contract, but will he be really available when it comes down to being in games? Mm-hmm. This running back class is really deep. You're not going to get a first rounder out of this group, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of talent here. There's some run between the tackles guys. There's some fast guys. There's some good combo guys that have speed, height, weight, all that kind of stuff. And then as you go deeper into the draft, you're going to get guys that, specialize in one thing or another or whatever. So is there anybody you're paying attention to that you want to see? Like, how well are they going to test?
Well, I mean, just out of, not for the Seahawks, because I think he's going to go way before the Seahawks take a running back, but Isaiah Spiller, I want to see this guy run. I want to see where he tests at, because watching his tape, I think he would be such a perfect fit for Seattle. He would be what we saw from Penny the last 5 games. And he would be that instantly coming in. So I'm interested, but I don't think the Seahawks take him. I'm looking more at guys that are down the board a little bit. Guys like Hassan Hankins out of Michigan, and maybe Pierre Strong Jr. out of South Dakota State. Just to get an idea of how these guys run. Can they put up some numbers, especially some speed numbers that are better than we expect? Maybe show some agility that we're not quite expecting on there. Just show us some explosiveness so that we can think, all right, so maybe if we get this guy in the 4th or 5th round, he could still be a guy we can depend on and not just be a special teamer.
Yeah, I think a guy like Abram Smith or Devontae Price or Zamir White is a little underrated at Georgia, I think. Damian Pierce, I think, out of Florida. He's got a little bit of buzz coming out of the Senior Bowl. I think the Seahawks were heavily participated at the Senior Bowl scouting, and I'm sure that he caught their eye and the kind of guy that they want to have in their locker room as far as the intangibles, being a leader, outspoken, all that kind of stuff, and just the way that he runs. I think he's kind of their guy that they look for. So I'm really kind of looking forward to seeing him. I'm looking forward to kind of seeing Brian Robinson. He's got the specs that I think Seattle looks for, but he's a little upright, a little top heavy. And so I'm not quite sure about that for them. But yeah, there's a lot of fun. I'm really interested kind of in the differences between Isaiah Spiller, Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker III, just because Kenneth Walker's the smallest guy out of that bunch, but runs really nice, gives you some options. Breece Hall and Isaiah Spiller are interesting. They're about the same size. Breece Hall's quite a bit quicker and faster, and I just want to see if Breece Hall looks like he could be a physical back. And we all know that Isaiah Spiller is, so that's an interesting group. How about wide receiver, Keith?
So the wide receiver group is, this is one where, if you think about it, Seattle's got their top 2 guys. They've got a developmental guy that they believe is their number 3, their kind of gadget player, and they've got a number 4 that they really like. So what the Seahawks are looking for in this draft at wide receiver is going to be depth, someone who can come in that 3-4-5 range, compete for snaps, play some special teams, do some of that stuff. They're not looking for a guy that's going to come out and be the guy. And so with that, you're looking at guys that are down the board a little bit. And I'm looking, at maybe like a Kyle Phillips out of UCLA, Calvin Austin III out of Memphis. That kind of range is where I'm looking at guys, and we'll see if they can find. Now, that doesn't mean they won't come out and be like, hey, this person who we thought was a first round pick drop to us, in early in round 3, we're going to just do it. And they might take a guy that's way up here on the board, someone maybe like Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati, but I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting them to look at more of that, probably third tier.
Like a Ty Freifogel or Velas Jones. I mentioned Velas Jones in the mock draft that we did. I really like that. In fact, I noticed he's moving up the board a little bit. Danny Gray, you mentioned as a possibility that we would, Reggie Robertson, Slade Bolden, all those guys have some ability. Braylon Sanders, Dontario Drummond. Okay.
Yeah. Trey Turner out of Virginia Tech is another one that I like.
So it's just interesting to get all those guys in the room and see. How about tight end?
So at tight end, I mean, I don't see a first round pick in this group, but
we have a need though.
Yeah, we do. There's some really interesting guys. I mean, Isaiah Likely is a name that I'm very interested to see how he runs, because he looks like he's going to be a pure joker type, a guy that doesn't do a lot of inline blocking, but is just super efficient in the passing game.
Would you consider a player like that if he were to be there with Seattle's second pick, which would be in the 3rd round?
Oh yeah, I would. It's kind of like basically you're looking at getting a guy whose talent will mimic a guy like Jimmy Graham. And no, he's not as big and maybe not as quick, but he's kind of the similar type of guy. And if you can get that in the 3rd round and you have a true weapon at tight end, you kind of look at it. Another guy that I'm very interested in is UCLA's Greg Dulcich. Guy that's currently thought of as like a 4th rounder right now, but honestly, after what we saw at the Senior Bowl, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go in early round 3. And I just want to see how he tests, because if he comes out and just kind of, dominates the testing, yeah, he's going to go in round 3, maybe the back end of round 2. If he comes out and disappoints, well, he'll go back down to being a 4th round pick, like he was thought of before the Senior Bowl. So he's another guy that I'm really interested in.
Are you taking a look at like short shuttles or straight line speed, or are you talking about vertical broad jump, looking for explosion? What are you looking for from him?
So for a guy like Dulcich, I'm looking at like a 3-cone or a short shuttle, his ability to move laterally. I want to see a good vert, so it shows power in the lower half. I mean, those are the types of things that I'm looking at for him. Is I want him to show basically that he's got athletic feet, that he can move, and that he can turn that movement into power. And if he can do both of those things, then he can be developed into a tremendous blocker to go with the pass catching and stuff we've already seen.
Out of the tight end group, do you look at the bench press at all as part of that a power equation to make sure that they've got strong upper body right now so they can engage in the hand fighting that's necessary on the ends?
A little bit. I mean, I'll take notice if a guy like Isaiah Likely benches a lot, because I don't expect him to. I'll also take a look at if a guy like Jeremy Ruckert out of Ohio State can only do 18 reps.
Yeah.
Then right. I'm like, oh, wow, he's going to drop. He's going to drop way down. But I'm kind of looking more for stuff like that. If I want guys to surprise me one way or the other before I truly look at it, because I don't think of tight end as a pure power position the way you do like an offensive tackle or guard or that kind of thing. I want them to win with technique, positioning, block angles, and that has more to do with the lower body than the upper body.
So speaking of offensive tackles, do you expect the Seahawks to be in the offensive tackle market this year?
How could they not be?
So, okay. So if they are serious about it, they're really going to be in this game at the combine and looking at these prospects. What Absolutely. Do you expect to where the Seahawks might be looking as far as level of the draft?
So it kind of depends on what happens with Dwayne Brown. If he's gone, I could see them taking offensive tackle with their first pick. A guy like Daniel Falele, it will be someone that I'm interested in at the combine, because I want to see what if he comes in at 380 pounds but still moves well.
Did you watch some of the tape though from the Senior Bowl practices and stuff?
I did. It didn't look good.
Oh. So I'm not at all interested in that. I'm hoping that he's undraftable on their board, but who knows?
A guy like Darian Kennard out of Kentucky and Sean Ryan out of UCLA are another couple of guys that I really like in this draft. I think Sean Ryan is underrated
Really?
by the draft.
Do you think that they would need to go up and get him with their 41st pick, or do you think he's going to be hanging around?
I think he can hang around beyond that. If they trade back into the 50s, I think that's a good spot for Sean Ryan. Or if they maybe he does drop lower than I expect, and he's available, there in the 60s, and then they can get him there. I think he's going to be a better player. I would draft him over a guy like Falele, without consideration. And the draft media has Falele going a whole round earlier than Sean Ryan.
So we've talked about prospect Abraham Lucas out of Washington State. Just speaking of the combine, it seems like Abraham Lucas is more of an athletic tackle there that would look really good at the combine, perform well, test well, etc. Maybe raise his stock a little bit. If he was sitting there with our second pick in the third round, I would snap him up, pretty easily. Right now, he's on everyone's big boards at around 100. But if you could get him at 77 or wherever we pay at 75, 77, something like that, I would solve that problem with a guy like that.
You could look at him and do that. What I want to see at the combine from him is I want him to do well on the bench. I want his measurements for his arm length to come back and not have him look like a T-Rex. You know what I mean? His footwork is there. His hand placement, his technique is there. But I want him to show me an ability to truly block with power, not just block with technique and finesse. And if he can show the physicality in his testing results, that you can get that out of him, then I am going to be ready to draft him, and especially if you can get him in the third round. And then you just give him a little bit of development time and stick him in there at left tackle and roll with it. I think that would be a good fit. But if he doesn't, if he only does like 18 reps on the bench or that kind of stuff, doesn't have a good vert, so you're looking at not having necessarily the power in the lower half, then I could see him dropping even further, just because teams are going to worry that he's a finesse player and not capable of truly handling the physicality of the NFL.
So another player that I'm interested in seeing at the combine that would be available a little later, 4th, 5th round, is Braxton Jones, the offensive tackle out of Southern Utah.
Yep. Because
he's prototypical left tackle-ish kind of guy at 6'7", 306. He's got a 84 and a quarter inch wingspan, which is perfect for that position.
Yeah,
I would love to see how smooth he is, because he's supposed to be real smooth. His footwork's supposed to be good. He's long, tall, athletic. A guy like that may end up, since he went played for Southern Utah, a guy like that shows up at the combine, interviews well, his tape shows up then at that point, where guys are going back and double checking. And he could be a prospect that moves up a little bit. But if Seattle goes with different position groups earlier in the draft and they want a guy that they could bring along, maybe Dwayne Brown sticks around for a year, this guy might be a great choice in the middle rounds.
Yeah. I mean, he's a guy in the 4th, 5th round area. He would come in and, they think they drafted Braxton Jones last year, right?
Yes.
He's very much in the Stone Forsythe mold. Got all the physical parts, got to develop technique, got to develop the player in general. But, if they see him as an upgrade over Forsythe, or maybe, hey, you know what, let's have 2 of that, put 1 on each side as a backup, and, develop our offensive tackles of the future, then I could see them doing that. But I do think that he is kind of redundant with Forsythe if you're looking for a developmental tackle.
How about the interior? Sorry.
Wow. Allergy season.
Yeah.
All right. So On the interior, this is actually a weird spot because the Seahawks have their guards, and what they need is a center. And so when you start looking at the interior, because those players are kind of looped or linked together, and it's kind of put out, oh, here's the interior lineman, but they're really different needs for the two positions. I would say a guy like Alec Lindstrom in round 4 out of Boston College is a guy I'd look at. Maybe Chris Paul out of Tulsa. He's more of a guy that's going to be like round 5. These are the types of guys that I'm looking at as far as can they develop and show that they can be a center. Being a center is just not a position where you draft high. And so the teams that are looking at like Tyler Linderbaum, if you're going to draft him in the first round, which you're going to have to, he better come in and be a Pro Bowler early and an All-Pro at some point in order to justify that pick. And I just, it's kind of like drafting a running back in the first round. Yeah. I'm not a huge supporter of that. Not when you can get a guy like Ed Ingram in round 3.
Well, we all know the Seahawks probably made a mistake last year, and that would have been high.
Yes,
relatively at 55 or whatever.
But at 55, right? You're talking the back end of round 2.
Yes.
That's not a bad place to draft a center, and the Seahawks could
especially a starting center. Yeah,
a starting center who actually turned out to be significantly better than most draft media thought he would be, and they could go. Last year would have been different, and the offseason right now would be very different had they gone that route. Instead, they drafted a gadget wide receiver who couldn't stay healthy. I think that was a major miss by John Snyder.
So I know what you're going to say to me right now, and I'll acknowledge that and say that we're going a little long, and we may split this thing in 2, just an FYI for our listeners, and we'll figure that out. But let's get to the defense.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWSeahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.